This is Jones and Company, and today we are talking breast cancer in the Bahamas. Cases we find alarming. 23% of those tested for BRCA 1 and 2 found to be positive. So 1 in 10 women you find positive, eh? Yes?
For breast cancer, it's more like 1 in 4.
1 in 4.
We haven't studied the general population yet, but we're guessing probably more like 1 in 20, 1 in 30. So
no, with breast cancer.
With breast cancer, it's 1 in 4.
1 in 4. Okay, Godfrey.
But tell me, have you found any ethnic differences
within the Bahamas?
Yes.
Well, I'll let Melissa answer that because I'm not up on the ethnic differences within from island to island.
No, from racially,
Within the
people of
Bahamas.
European descent or people of African descent. Did you find any
I
higher?
think they're mostly of African descent.
Most of
But
African.
if I'm not sure I can pinpoint it more than that. But maybe Melissa would like to say something about the different islands.
Based on the information from Dr. Land that we've received just today actually at the conference, he stated that they've tested the white Bahamians as well as the black Bahamians for the gene, and the gene is found more in the black Bahamians. They found a BRCA positive much more than the white Bahamians. So.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, when one discovers that, a lady discovers that she is tested positive for the gene, what do you recommend? What should happen?
Well, first we go over her individual risk. We want to make sure she has counseled properly and has an idea of how high the risk is. And so for these mutations, for a young woman, the risk of breast cancer is probably about 75% over her lifetime. So it's considerably higher than the average woman. Ovarian cancer is about 20%. We were discussing today at the conference, what are the different options? Well, you have screening by mammography and physical examination. In some cases, you could take a pill, like tamoxifen, which has been approved for breast cancer prevention, and oral contraceptives will reduce the risk of ovarian cancer. But I think the backbone, it's unfortunate, but in 2013, after 20 years after the genes are discovered, the majority is due to prevention is still surgical prevention. So we discuss the implications and the possibilities around having preventive surgery. For example, Angelina Jolie,
Yes.
who had the same gene mutation, had the same risk estimate, choose to have a breast surgery reduction. In that context, issues could raise about breast reconstruction. A mastectomy, a surgical prevention of breast cancer, involves removal of the breast, but it varies, and I'm not an expert in what is available to women here accessible for reconstruction, but for women in the United States and in some other countries, that would be followed by reconstruction. Not everybody has that. The other mainstay would be surgery. We offer and recommend that they have their ovaries removed around age 35, which essentially reduces the risk of ovarian cancer, but also cuts the risk of breast cancer in half.
Taking the pill, though, and what's the name of it?
Oral contraceptive,
Yes.
birth control pill.
Yes.
Or tamoxifen is also a pill.
Yes. Would that be the desirable way to go?
Well, when I first started this research in 1987, I thought at that time that the goal would be to have a pill, and I thought by 2013 we would have a pill and we could give women and they would choose to take a pill rather than to have the surgery. And I was fooled about that. 20 years later, in studying 14,000 women around the world with these gene mutations, I am overwhelmed by the evidence that says they much rather have the surgery. And I think it's reasons other than just statistics. I would have assumed that a pill would have been an easier pill to swallow than to have a preventive surgery, but it turns out not the case.
Yeah, let's talk to Mrs.
George,
Siegel.
let me get this question in there.
Here, no, hold on one second. You, Mrs. Siegel here, with respect, you had breast cancer.
I was diagnosed with breast cancer for the first time, and I chose to have a lumpectomy. What happens is that they saw a spot, and that one spot from Monday to Wednesday went from one spot to 2 spots on one side and 3 spots on the other. And once you're told that you can see these shadows, correct, on the MRI, you want them biopsied. And going through the biopsy process is extremely painful but necessary so that you know what you're dealing with and you can make an educated decision in terms of your treatment and where to go from there. And so I decided that the best thing for me to do at the time would be just to do a lumpectomy and remove what needed to be removed. It did not yield me a very pretty result afterwards, and I was not that happy, but my doctors really dissuaded me from going ahead with the mastectomy. My feeling at the initial time was just take them off. I don't want to be bothered with this. I don't want to go through my life worrying. But they did not agree with that decision, and I listened to what they had to say. Unfortunately, 6 months later, when I went for my follow-up checkup, the spot that they did not remove was invasive cancer. And then I looked at them and I said, now we're doing it my way. I don't want to live from every 3 months to 3 months going for MRIs and being watched the rest of my life like this. And I just feel that the most educated decision to make as a woman is to remove your breasts and remove the highest incident of the cancer reoccurring.
And that is what's essentially happening around the United States, isn't it?
Well, it's certainly changing in that direction. It's not happening in Canada yet, but in the United States, the latest statistics are about 1/4 of women who have breast cancer, a small breast cancer, in one breast that could opt for a lumpectomy are actually having a bilateral mastectomy. 20 years ago, that number was probably less than 5%. So, but in the last 20 years, it's gone from about 5% to 25%. But it's a topic of interest, and it's a dialogue, and certainly I think the story that women should be able to participate in that decision fully is rational, and I can understand a woman not wanting to come back and see me every 6 months if her option is to go home and that's it, you've done everything you can do, and you can go home and stop worrying that you haven't and get back into your regular life.
You talk about Canada and the U.S., right?
Yeah.
What about developing countries where the state has to play an important role because of the affordability? Many of these women who would need this kind of operation cannot afford it. What is the role of the state in this?
Well, I think we think about the state and we think about the population. I've personally done research studies like this one in many countries in Latin America and in the developing world and in the Caribbean, including Cuba, including Costa Rica, including Venezuela and some other countries which you could compare. And certainly in Cuba, we didn't have the frequency of the mutations. When the first study was completed in Cuba, I left there having studied about the same number of patients, finding only a handful of mutations, no genetic test. At the end of that study, I think the conclusion was, I don't think we should be pushing forward on this genetic front. You may have better ways to invest your money in screening or prevention. I think the fact is in the Bahamas that it's 27% of cancers makes it a unique situation, and that even with less than optimal resources available for public health, we have to make sure some of them are directed appropriately. So a country like the Bahamas, there are many different kind of cancers, there are many kind of breast cancers, and only 1/4 of the women with breast cancer have a mutation. But I do think among the priorities in the healthcare system, we could achieve a tremendous amount here by investing in that and the genetic testing. and haven't made the same claim in any other country.
This is fascinating. Melissa, you have been doing a number of fundraising events. How are women in the Bahamas responding?
To the fundraising? Or
Fundraising
to the
events and as well as to the testing.
Well, women are very excited about the testing. We had no problems getting women to come in to do a test. And like I said, we have a waiting list. So that says a lot to the fact that women really want to know what's going on with themselves. And as a woman myself, I took the test, and it's important. I want to know for me, and I want to know for my daughter who's 5, and that is most important for my 5-year-old daughter who's coming up. So I would like for women who are in the position to give to the initiative, to this research, that might not want to do the test or that did the test. You can sponsor a woman $200 and allow her to get this. This is life-saving here that we're talking about.
Dr. Nayrod, when I was a boy, I didn't hear about the incidence of breast cancer in the Bahamas as we are hearing now. And as a geneticist, I just wonder if you can give us an idea how far back this thing probably was happening in the Bahamas. This high incidence of breast cancer and the positive for BRCA1 and 2.
Well, we don't have all the information now that we would like. I can't give you a firm answer, in fact, of how many cases of breast cancer there are diagnosed a year in the Bahamas to compare that to, let's say, 40 years ago. But we do look at the family trees, and that's quite interesting. When we investigate a woman who has a mutation, our genetic counselor will make a very detailed diagram and a pedigree, we call it, which is a formal recording of the ancestry of the woman, and asking them to the best of their knowledge, did you have breast cancer? And in fact, when we dig into it, the answer is yes. So many of the women who might have had breast cancer now at age 40 said, yeah, my mom had it at age 35. In fact, we didn't, until we started looking, we didn't expect that. So in fact, I suspect, without firm proof, but based on this suggestive look back in history, that it's been there for probably at least 50 years. And it's partly awareness, partly organizations such as the BBCIF bringing this out into the public. But I think it's been there, and we're in a position to have better records and to do something about it.
But isn't genetic testing the benchmark for the prevention or addressing a major public health issue?
Well, in most countries, the number of mutation carriers is relatively small. Now, I should say that
in the context of the Bahamas.
In the context of the Bahamas, what makes it a preventable disease, we would love to be able to prevent breast cancer in all women in the Bahamas. That's really our ultimate goal. But when we went over the options for prevention, and I stuck out and I said, well, really, surgery is the most effective way of preventing breast cancer. I can say that to a woman with a mutation that has a risk about 75%, and she'll look to me and say, yes, that's a rational recommendation, and she'll go and have the surgery. For the average woman whose risk of breast cancer is closer to 5 or 10%, the surgery is just as effective. It doesn't select between the carriers and the non-carriers, but I would never recommend, based on a 5% risk, to have that surgery. And
that is why I said the genetic testing is the basis.
Well, the genetic testing is the basis for that. The prevention isn't tailored purely based on the gene. We're not correcting an abnormal gene. We're just responding to the abnormal gene using techniques. All of those techniques, the tamoxifen, the oral contraceptives, the surgery, and the screening, are just as effective in women without the mutation. Mostly the reason we don't recommend them as strongly is because of the degree of risk Not that there's a biological difference with women with and without the gene.
How long can a woman have this gene and not have breast cancer per se?
Well, 1 out of 4 women, I mean, the 75% risk is very high, but it also means 25% of women live a normal life, die, would never have breast cancer.
With the gene?
Yeah, so the risk, 3 out of 4 of them will get breast cancer in their lifetime, but 1 out of 4 manages not to escape.
it, eh?
We don't know exactly why. So, but on average, those that get it at age 37. So of the women that we've tested with breast cancer that were positive, I think there must be 50 or 60 now. The average age at which they got breast cancer was 37, but the range was as low as, I think, 24 and as high as, I think, in the 60s.
Ambassador, what is the impact on the husband when one finds out that one's wife?
I think most men really have a very difficult time coming to terms with the reality of the fact that their wives need them in such a way, emotionally, supportive ways, that for most men it's strange. It's not the norm. And
Because men mostly depend on the women.
yeah, it turns to some degree upside down.
Yeah.
And seeing your wife go through this not once but twice, and the emotional stress it causes, because it's just not about losing a piece of your body. Okay, it's about thinking whether you're going to
make it or not.
have a life after.
Right.
And and we as males don't always think in the same way that women do. For me, it's been a journey. I will share with you at times, I wish I could have been there more, because she was in New York and I was in the Bahamas. And you always know you can do things better in looking at it. This partnership that we have has allowed us to grow in ways that is very even hard to describe, because as we work together, we're saving lives. It's about saving lives. And you save one life. How important and what cost do you put to that? So I think men either run away from it, to be very honest with you, or they need counseling to understand it. And it's very difficult to embrace it. But at the end of the day, if you're going to have a successful marriage, you have to embrace it and learn how to be there for your wife no matter what.
Mr. Siegel, I see you tearing up as your husband spoke. It must be very, very touching. Let's take a break here on the program. We'll come right back.